So, in my last couple of videos, I covered every mainline entry in the Resident Evil franchise from the classic lineup of fixed camera angle games. That took a lot to do. Especially because of the age of those games, and it really drained me out, but I made it through. I think I deserve a little treat for getting through all of that, and that brings me here. The Chronicles era of Resident Evil is a bit hard to explain. It's one of those things where you just had to be there. This was back during the motion control phase that developers of the late 2000s were obsessed with. The PlayStation Move, the Nintendo Wii, the Xbox Kinect. Even growing up with it, I knew it was a gimmick, but we did get some absolute bangers. And my mother, herself being a Resident Evil fan, picked up Umbrella Chronicles for the Nintendo Wii she was obsessed with. And we all used to play this, House of the Dead, and Dead Space Extraction on these things. These games are, believe it or not, since you would think these are just Lightgun spin-offs, actually canon. Well, partially they are, and that's why we'll be going through them. What these are is sort of shorter, summarized Lightgun versions of Resident Evil 1's remake, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Code Veronica, and a few special exclusive stories that lead into Resident Evil 4. These were a way for Capcom to not only cash in on the motion control craze of the time, but also a way to give new Resident Evil fans something to play as an alternative to experience the stories of all the games before Resident Evil 4. By this point, the gaming landscape had changed. Almost every third-person shooter was and still is using over-the-shoulder camera. So more than ever before, it was difficult for people to go back and want to play the originals. Before 2 and 3 remake, this was Capcom's way to give you a more accessible way to get caught up. Yeah, these may be light gun games in design, but believe it or not, it's actually pretty easy to play these with a controller. As, like I said, these were designed not just for the trend, but also as catch-up. So, they do a pretty good job with the lock-on and aim assist so that you can play these decently. Not optimal, but fully playable. And that's how I'll be playing through these to prove the point. This video will be shorter than previous ones, I'm guessing, mostly because we covered the story of all these games already, but also because these are shorter versions. Spoilers anyway though, so here's your warning. This ain't no spoiler-free channel. Starting with Umbrella Chronicles, this is the first of the 2 games. It's interesting in that it's told from Wesker's point of view as he narrates the events of Resident Evil 0, 1, and 3. I'm not sure why Resident Evil 2 isn't included, since we know that Birkin was his closest colleague in Umbrella and he grew up with him. But there is a bonus campaign that tells the story of Ada's escape with the sample and Hunk's escape with the sample during the RE2 events, so at least there's something here. He starts from the beginning and we play through the shortened events of Resident Evil 0. Now, these games aren't exactly lookers, even for their time. I'm using a PS3 emulator for the native controller support, so that may have something to do with it, but honestly I don't remember it looking that great even on the Wii's original hardware. The budget for this game in particular is pretty small, and you can tell this was kind of a throwaway project. Be that as it may, the team behind this game put the money to good use. You would think they would have just used cutscenes from Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1's actual releases, but they don't do that. They actually completely remake cutscenes from scratch to better fit both characters being present during the events. Even shit that's already pre-rendered and they really didn't have to. And things don't always play out exactly like the real games, but close enough. At least until we get to 3, but we'll come back to that. The scenario starts out similar enough. Billy saves Rebecca and they agree to work together, making their way through the train, the church, to the underground lab, that sort of thing. A lot of the bosses are present and accounted for. The Scorpion, the Bat, even the Proto-Tyrant, complete with his weakness on his heart. Gameplay-wise, it's about what you'd expect if you've ever been to an arcade and played one of these types of games. Your pistol has infinite ammo and you pick up power weapons through the game like shotguns, grenades, healing items, and whatnot. This game is after Resident Evil 4, of course, so a little of that DNA has been injected into these retellings with things like these cool quick-time events and the melee attacks. When things grab you, you of course shake them off and deliver a fucking glorious mollywop to whatever dared to touch you. I fucking love these and they make this game so much fun. You will, however, see these quite a bit in the first game because you'll be getting grabbed quite a bit. Umbrella Chronicles of these 2 games is definitely the clunkiest. Even at the time these were popular, we had stuff like House of the Dead ported to home consoles, and I would play that and then come back to this, and how fast you can put shots down range versus how sluggish the shooting was in this game was night and day. Seriously, here's gameplay of the House of the Dead remake versus Umbrella Chronicles. It just feels a lot more stiff. Now, the pistol is a pretty weak weapon owing to the infinite ammo and everything, but it does offer one unique advantage, and that is critical headshots. It's the only weapon in the game that can do it, and these make short work of zombies but are a bit harder to pull off. They require like a special sweet spot in a headshot. There are some other downsides gameplay wise despite how much fun the game is. One of which being the fact that it doesn't really tell you about weapon upgrades at all. I went through almost this entire game not knowing that in between missions in a completely separate screen off to the side I could upgrade guns to be stronger. And a lot of the later chapters wouldn't have been so brutal on me if I'd known that. Another thing is the scoring system. Since it's Resident Evil, it can't escape having something annoying in it, and in this case it's the scoring system. This is really just a relic of shitty old game design in general and not exclusive to this game, as a lot of old games used to do this, but to unlock later chapters and scenarios, you need high scores on certain stages. You're graded by shooting everything in sight, collecting data files scattered through the levels, how fast you get through it, and other dumb shit. Like, this is a major pet peeve of mine and it always has been. I really do not like this sort of thing, and I'm fucking glad gaming left this dog shit behind, but seriously, just give me the fucking chapters for completing a scenario. These games want you to be in the zone. They do everything they can to make you feel like you're there. I wouldn't be caught dead being that pasty ass nerd you catch in forums and making these sort of videos whining about my immersion and all that shit, but come on now, there's no denying it detracts from the vibes and the feeling like you're in the world fighting these things that these games are going for with their camera work and their gameplay, to then be graded by how fast you mash on the fire button like a fucking spastic trying to shoot everything in sight anytime there's not a zombie on the screen. All this work was done to create a mood, an atmosphere, and clinging to an outdated scoring system kills it. Usually in these kinds of games I say fuck the score and just enjoy myself, and that's how I was playing it until I found out I couldn't complete the game without certain grades in certain chapters. But those are most of the issues with the gameplay covered here. Outside of that, this is a full light gun experience and some of the most fun you can have in the series. There's been other attempts at light gun games in the series, but Chronicles is the most famous and successful attempt. And there's just something charming about going through these games and seeing them go full House of the Dead as you recognize rooms and locations from the actual games faithfully created in a game like this. Once Billy and Rebecca get to Marcus, things get a bit odd. Twink Marcus has been completely removed, probably for the better as that was always kind of silly. But the boss encounter is mostly kept intact, and so is the ending. Rebecca still lets Billy escape justice for some dick and he runs off. Also, I know I'm not tripping here, but don't these redone cutscenes look less weird than the originals? Like, the characters actually look correct and consistent with their models. I don't know how they pulled it off, but they made me actually enjoy Resident Evil 0 here. This is actually the first version of the game's story I played in middle school. Then the Origins collection came out way later when I was barely out of high school, and I was so excited to play the full real game, and well, if you've watched my last video, you know how that turned out. Next, Wesker recaps the events of Resident Evil 1. This is by far the highlight. And hot take here, but I actually like this retelling a lot better than any other lore-wise. Chris and Jill stick together like you would expect him to, just based off of the type of characters they are. And like I've complained about since the beginning, this unfucks the lore, but only slightly. Barry gets shafted here, I'm not gonna lie, he's completely cut out. But if they were gonna pick between Barry and best girl Rebecca to put in this scenario, then the choice they made here was the right one. I'll take Rebecca over Barry any day. It's also nice to have Chris and Jill working as a unit, and their dialogue and interactions here are lore accurate to the characters. Hell, they even bring back the Crimson Heads. you'll notice that a lot of the more annoying enemies have been rebalanced to be more bearable in Lightgun form. This game is so sick, dude. Most of the rogues gallery is here. Yawn, Plant 42, Tyrant. How well most of these games translated to this style is fucking crazy. They all work as final bosses to a level. I'm not gonna lie, they do have to sort of skip ahead or cut certain locations out that are really just a lot of walking in the original game, but this could have turned out a lot worse. Also, now that I'm thinking on it, does anyone else find it a bit odd that Star's Alpha and Bravo teams have supposedly never met? Alpha, from what I can tell, outranked Bravo, and Wesker therefore commands Enrico too. Maybe not, maybe they work as a unit, but the way Wesker talks, that's how he makes it seem. They also work in the same department under Chief Irons, and you're telling me they've never met or cooperated in the field before now, compared notes on cases. There's one Star's office in RE2, and it's all desks for Alpha. Definitely something that I wish the remake of 2 had fixed by giving Bravo an office to explore, you know? The Wesker situation plays out with some slight changes. Now that Chris and Jill are here together, this is probably the best version of the moment so far. We see Wesker sneak and take the virus just before they arrive, something no version of this moment has shown you, and as you would expect, he lets Tyrant out and he gets absolutely murked. And Chris and Jill take him down together to escape. They even still drop the rocket launcher for you to finish it off with. And once again, I gotta say, these cutscenes and how consistent they are with the originals, even being made from scratch, is crazy. This game is such a gem. Unfortunately, there's one giant zit on this game's ass, and that's the travesty that is the retelling of Resident Evil 3. I've said this before, but Resident Evil 3, more than any of these games, is a product of its time and how its original plot and pacing was set up, and that makes it extremely difficult to ever deal with and try to remake. Its entire plot hinges on Jill doing absolutely fucking nothing useful for the first third of the game. And it isn't until she tries to get the train rolling that she has any sort of goal. Because she meets Carlos and he fucking gives her one. Then once that plan falls apart for the last third of the game, again, she doesn't really do much of anything resembling having a plan until Carlos kind of stumbles on a chopper in the last 10 minutes of the game. That's why Resident Evil 3 Remake had to go in and rewrite a lot. The plot kind of sucking compared to the first two, didn't really matter in the 1990s because Nemesis was cool and it had the best gameplay, but it doesn't cut it anymore, and I do not envy anyone who has to turn this mess into a good story. Then having to turn it into a good story and a light gun game on top of that, fucking impossible. Be that as it may, I'm not gonna lie to you boys. The Umbrella Chronicles adaptation is not very good at all. Unlike Resident Evil 1 and 0 adaptations that have fresh games, levels, and assets to work with, the Resident Evil 3 story had to be built from scratch and turned into a light gun game. True to the original, a lot of Resident Evil 3's adaptation is just Carlos and Jill running around doing absolutely fucking nothing. The issue is that since this is a light gun game, the whole train plot is not gonna work. It could have maybe just went straight for the clock tower part of the original plot and that would have worked, but that would have cost a lot to do, and their budget for this game couldn't have been much. And they probably blew most of it trying to remake the police station. So instead, they try to salvage what they can and make the plot about Jill and Carlos trying to get to the police station to be picked up for rescue. And I never really thought about this much until now, but besides Nemesis, Resident Evil 3 doesn't really have a rogues gallery of boxes to go through to create the light gun style lineup like 0 had, or 1 had. And that's why some missions end with no boss fights here. Besides Nemesis, Jill fought some lame ass worms and that was about it. I really feel for anyone that had to try to make this shit work, because I know just from looking at the original, even though it is the best of the original trilogy, there was no way this was getting done right without a bigger budget. Which was not gonna happen for a throwaway light gun game that Capcom had no way of knowing would be a smash hit. Just about the only good level here is the police station. This is when Nemesis finally shows up. He shows up way too late for my liking. I would have really brought him in by like the second level or so, especially because I don't think that one had a boss to it. He just sort of chases Jill and Carlos around and they run all across the police station trying to get away from him until they finally put him down on the rooftop for the final battle. This adaptation just really wasn't very good, and it's probably the worst scenario in the game. The other ones, admirably, are close enough to the source material. Resident Evil 3, on the other hand, feels like if someone just kind of briefly told you what it was about in a giant run-on sentence. Yeah, so like, in Resident Evil 3, Jill meets this guy named Carlos and they run around the city trying to escape while this thing called Nemesis shows up and it wants to kill Jill, so they kill it and then they escape on a helicopter. Thankfully, with that done and out of the way, the rest of the game is much better, and this is where we start getting into the exclusive lore of these games that is still relevant today. This is the juicy shit. First off, we're going to start with Rebecca's exclusive chapters that bridge the gap between Resident Evil 0 and 1. For some reason, after she split with Billy, she came to the mansion and just fucking went to sleep. Like, just straight up took a fucking nap on a random bed here. Remember, she's a rookie. This is her first mission and she's already fucking sleeping on the job. I can't believe this shit. Now, I want to insult her and call her fucking lazy and useless for this shit, but Rebecca is precious and to be protected at all costs, so I'll let her get away with it. Richard finds her and they search for Enrico and try to make some sense of what's going on. They search around the mansion, catching a glimpse of some shady looking dudes dumping a body outside. And then run into Jan, who starts chasing them around the mansion, ultimately leading to Richard taking a beating to save her, just before Chris and Jill arrived in the main scenario. Another cool bonus chapter tells the story of Ada's escape after Resident Evil 2. She's badly beaten up and barely alive, and they do a very impressive job with how they convey her role as a spy. She arrives at her meetup site to find her contact dead, and she negotiates with Wesker over comms for pickup, in exchange for the sample of the G-Virus she's obtained. And this is the moment when she receives her iconic grapple gun that you get to put to good use here. This game is fucking sick. Eventually, she makes it to the evac location and the shading guy from Rebecca's bonus chapters is the pilot that picks her up, just before Raccoon City is destroyed. There's also a fourth survivor scenario that retells Hunk's famous mode, but since I never really liked that mode to begin with, I really didn't care for it here either. It's there if you like it. The real meat and potatoes here are the separate scenarios for Wesker that run parallel to the main normal ones. They start from Resident Evil 0 into Resident Evil 1 and lead into the final Umbrella's End scenario for one huge payoff. We start by taking control of Wesker right around the time Marcus releases the monkeys on Rebecca and Billy in Resident Evil 0, and recap Wesker and Birkin making their plans. This is pre-virus transformation Wesker here. We even battle Proto-Tyrant, who I assume is a failed research experiment by Wesker before he perfected his creation, and is not too happy about being an unwanted and unloved child. Wesker puts it to sleep where Rebecca will find it later, and while trying to escape the Marcus estate, he's confronted by the shady Russian dude we've been spotting. Of fucking course, his name is Sergei Vladimir. Vlad is actually Wesker's commanding officer, and he doesn't really like Wesker's tone or the fact that Wesker was left in charge of this facility after Marcus's death and needs to take responsibility for this virus leak, so he sicks his tyrant buddy on him. Wesker isn't really a match for this right now, so runs off to set his plan in motion. We pick up that plan right after Wesker's death at the hands of his special tyrant model in Resident Evil 1. The G-Virus has revived him in a special way. He's retained full mental clarity, functionality, and has gained superpowers instead of being turned into a zombie. We'll learn in Resident Evil 6, this is due to his special blood and immune system that can fight off this sort of thing pretty strongly. I always thought it was a T-Virus, but I guess it was a G-Virus. Wesker tries to grab his data, only to find that Vlad has stolen it and transported it to something called the UMF-013. The same container we see him lugging around in Ada's chapter where he's stealing it from Umbrella there too. I'm not gonna keep tiptoeing around this, it's the Red Queen. Yes, the AI Red Queen from the live action movies. I think this is pretty cool. It's a computer core that stores the archives of all Umbrella's research and important data. Whatever your opinion on the movies are themselves is fucking irrelevant. Most of the early ones were smash hits and extremely popular, so finding a way to bring something from those into the official lore for fans of those in a way that's tasteful and respectful is greatly appreciated here. This also feels very Umbrella to do. As of right now, Red Queen has locked Wesker out of access to Umbrella's files, so he'll have to settle for an escape and come up with a new plan later. That's gonna be a problem because Lisa Trevor ain't exactly dead and she's definitely not happy to see Wesker. So the two play cat and mouse around the Spencer estate until Wesker drops a chandelier on her, trapping her in place while Wesker escapes before the estate blows up. That leads to the star of the show as far as important moments in this game, and that is the fall of Umbrella. Wesker's dealings with Umbrella from the moment he's revived are a bit confusing to me. Apparently he no longer needs them, but has to be dealing with them in some shape or form, be that through Vlad or other means, to even know that Vlad has taken the Red Queen for himself to start his own research facility, and how to get Ada to hide out on top of the Red Queen to escape Raccoon City. Reading the wiki for a bit of clarification, I think there's some special unspecified rival company Wesker starts working for, which is the same one Ada was stealing the G sample for. This organization will later be absorbed into Tricell from RE5. Could have solved a lot of this confusion by just calling the fucking corporation Tricell. Either way, in 2003, Chris and Jill have joined up with a special branch of the government dedicated to fighting Umbrella's BOWs, and have received intel on a new facility in Russia being used to create a new weapon known as Talos. This is one of Umbrella's last remaining heavy hitters. They take this down as GG's. An outbreak has of course started there because Umbrella is incompetent, and Chris and Jill lead an attack on the base to shut everything down for good. At the same time, Wesker shows up to the facility intending to make his move and steal the Red Queen all for himself. He didn't plan on Jill and Chris or the government even being there. He just planned to come in here and kill everyone and make off with the data, but he'll take the distraction. Chris and Jill fight their way to the chamber Talos is being kept in. You'll notice a bizarre fuck up here where someone put Chris in his STARS outfit for a couple of seconds during this cutscene. I don't even know how you fuck up something like this, because someone had to animate this, which means they stared at it and how wrong it was for hours and hours, possibly even days, and just left it like this. But regardless, Vlad unleashes Talos on Chris and Jill and they fight to put it down. Meanwhile, Wesker tears his way through the underground defenses to reach the facility up top, coming face to face with Vlad, who's obsessed with his loyalty to Umbrella and sicks his two tyrant lapdogs on him. As annoying as this fight can be, this sort of first-person showcase of Wesker and these tyrants zippering around the place doing battle makes it all worth it. Killing them and entering the upper levels, he walks in on Vlad just as he sicks Talos on Chris and Jill, and in typical Resident Evil fashion, Vlad transforms into a monster, and Wesker is fighting him while Chris and Jill work on Talos. I fucking love how this all comes together. Chris and Jill kill Talos and shut down this facility, basically killing off Umbrella for good, while Wesker copies Red Queen's data to himself and sets Red Queen to self-destruct, killing her and slips out of the place undetected. He finds himself somewhere nice and cozy, and begins rummaging through the archives, learning everything he can. I really enjoy Umbrella Chronicles. It's probably one of my favorite stories in the Resident Evil franchise as a whole. You would expect it to be a soulless cash grab, just to cash in on a trend, like a lot of earlier attempts at something like this in the series were, especially Gun Survivor 2. But even with a small budget and the expectation that it was kinda just a throwaway title, these guys crafted something out of love and care, with only a blemish on it being Resident Evil 3, which was an impossible ask to do in the first place. I had moments of frustration with the boss battles being a bit bullshit, but overall I enjoyed my time with it, and it's absolutely worth checking out on an emulator if you're interested. And I got even better news. Darkside's Chronicle is even fucking better than that. With the first game being a hit, the team was clearly given a bigger budget and more freedom to craft one of the best types of these games you can ever play. It looks better, it feels better, it plays better. It starts with Leon and Krauser on a mission called Operation Javier, somewhere out in Mexico, to apprehend a man by the name of Javier, who's suspected of attempting to work with Umbrella on bioterrorism. Their mission right now is to meet their contact in a local town that will take them to Javier's mansion. When they get to said town, something is definitely wrong. They're attacked by infected villagers. You'll notice major improvements over Umbrella Chronicles right away. The camera is more cinematic, more active, more wobbly, mimicking a found footage style of horror film. The graphics have improved quite a bit, and your partner is visible and active in the world. These games were always made with co-op in mind, but now even solo you get a crazy cinematic experience. One thing that I really like is the physical and visible reloads in the world that help you feel like you're really there. All the cool shit like the melee counters to grabs are all still here, only you'll probably see it much less because of how much more responsive the controls are, so things rarely grab me. There are some quality of life improvements here as well. In Umbrella, whenever you picked up a green herb in the world, you used it instantly. Here, healing is mapped to a button and you can store multiple healing items, complete with mappable weapon hotkeys. In the last game, you picked up weapons and had to shuffle between them all awkwardly, and in the heat of the moment, it was a little clunky to get what you wanted when you wanted. All of these sort of additions bridge the gap between Lightgun into proper Resident Evil game a little better, and I had so much more fun playing this. Only downgrade from the previous game is that grenades now have to be equipped to be thrown, whereas in Umbrella they were a quick throw. Leon and Krauser fight their way to a man who warns them about a girl before he dies. They find her in some church singing to some monster that attacks them when she stops and passes out. They fight it until it runs away, and then they check on the girl. Krauser, seeing how easily Leon is able to deal with these things, thanks to his previous combat experience with them, asks to be filled in on Raccoon City. And this is how the game's narrative will work from here on out, formula-wise. We rewind back to the events of Resident Evil 2, and my god, these cutscenes are fucking gorgeous. In-game, the graphics are way above what the first game was, but they're still low budget. Right now, the PS3 emulator I'm using does not like MT framework games, so trying to up-res them for better and cleaner graphics and textures has zero effect. But fuck man, these cutscenes? Incredible. Especially Claire. This is the best she'll ever look in any Resident Evil game. I really like that they've modified her OG Resident Evil 2 outfit to be less tacky with blue jean shorts instead. That will become her trademark look from this point on in the series going forward, a red jacket and some sort of blue jeans with a few exceptions. Claire ain't no slouch in this game either. They make it clear she's got some fight in her this time around. And once again, just like Resident Evil 1's retelling, this game just flows so much better and smoother story-wise with Claire and Leon sticking together and working off each other back and forth with the dialogue. This shit is so good. Also, because there's only 2 scenarios to work with here, they're longer and more faithful to the source material than the previous game was. Not much of note that's actually important is cut here. You basically go through almost the full games from start to finish. This feels as much like a proper Resident Evil game as a Lightgun game can. You get a nice, cohesive, easy to understand and piece together flow of events here, because both A and B scenarios are combined into one and every bit improved. For example, they together chase Sherry down at one point when they see her. And they jump over the fucking liquor in the hallway on some Matrix shit to do it, dude. This game is fucking sick. And while doing that, an Umbrella helicopter drops down Trenchy to chase after them while they try to find Sherry. Chief Irons transforms into the G-adult boss. Claire is clearly jealous of how much attention Leon is giving Ada and dislikes her immediately. Leon still gets separated from Claire just for a second so he can still take a bullet for Ada. It's almost completely still intact and faithful. Everything you would expect to happen if you played the original happens. Leon and Claire are just present together for almost all of it, right down to the final boss fight. You also see how Leon never wanted to become an agent for the government. They forced him to do it and threatened to take Sherry and run tests on her if he didn't. The tragedy of this being, we'll learn in Resident Evil 6 they fucking did it anyway. His attempt to protect her here was for nothing. Recapping the events for Krauser, they take the girl they save while they travel upstream. Krauser doesn't like her, cause he's a hard ass, but you know Leon, soft on the ladies. The girl, whose name is Manuela, accompanies them through the way she escaped from the mansion. Things are a bit suspicious with her though. She seems to have made it past all this unharmed to escape in the first place, and seems concerned for Javier's well-being. That would be because, come to find out, that's his fucking daughter. Javier gave the Veronica virus to her to save her from a terminal illness. Someone gave it to Javier and told him in order to stop her from transforming, it takes 15 years for the virus to adjust to her bloodstream. And I can't believe it, but just like with Resident Evil 0, they unfuck this game and make it really fucking good. It starts with what they do to Steve. I've always liked Steve's character, but he's no longer insufferable to listen to voice acting wise here. And is actually pretty fucking likable and based.
Claire, you like to swim?
Excuse me?
Once again, I gotta say, Sphere Hunter is a fucking hater. I love these two together, and their relationship is even better now that they stick together the entire game and build their chemistry up. You can tell from the moment they find each other in this game they're a perfect match. And my boy Steve is already plotting, scheming, looking at the blueprints, planning his infiltration, and I don't blame him. Claire in this game, I gotta repeat myself, is out of this world. In her Code Veronica OG, she had a pretty face, but she had these ugly ass huge mom jeans on. But here, this outfit goes crazy. Alexia actually shows up a lot earlier in this telling, which the plot really needed to help try to convince the audience that she's alive. And Alfred has been changed and overhauled to be a lot more threatening and insane, instead of just a fucking weirdo that's about as threatening as a fly.
Alfred, you cross-dressing freak!
The story is rewritten a bit here, in that Claire and Steve are kind of forced to run some obstacle course that Alfred has set up for them. In exchange, he promises a key to a plane to get off the island. What they've done with Alfred here is such an improvement. I hope if they do a Code Veronica remake, they look to this retelling of it for inspiration, because this is so much better than the original. Lucas Baker from 7 wishes he was on this level. The promise of a key here is of course a lie and just an excuse to lure Steve into meeting his zombified father to try to break him. One slightly negative change here is that Wesker doesn't really do much in this retelling. He never really shows himself to Claire, and he and Chris just kind of glare at each other in the ending with no fight. So, I mean, the only reason this game originally even mattered has been downgraded in order to upgrade all the other characters. I think it's a fair trade just to make this game not dog shit. Alfred is still dressing up like his sister like a fucking weirdo and runs off in embarrassment when he gets exposed like a little bitch.
Alfred, you cross-dressing freak!
And everything else plays out properly. Alfred releases the real Veronica out of sleeping before dying. Thankfully, the game isn't going to make you replay the whole fucking game again and skip straight to Chris releasing Claire. She's just as insane as her brother this time around, almost childlike. They really try to focus on her genius and her obsession with experiments, and I think this characterization of her is far more interesting than her original version where she just acted like every other typical big bad in the game. It still hurts to see Steve go out like this, especially now that he's a much better character. I don't think Claire ever quite recovers from this. Every man she ever trusts from this point on, including Leon, will betray her at some point for their own selfish reasons. Steve is just about the only guy who, until he died, tried his best to sacrifice for her, even disobeying fucking mind control. If you compare how happy and playful she is during her interactions here, versus how she interacts with the guy she liked in Resident Evil Revelations 2, it's like night and day. These two were kind of made for each other here, and something in her definitely died after this. Anyway, Chris and Claire confront Alexia for the final battle, and in this version, she's actually killed Alfred herself. And here, Chris and Claire work together to take down Alexia. Much better. This puts Chris and Claire over in the lore both as capable fighters. They escape on the plane and book it out of there. The rest of the game is Leon and Krauser finishing up the Operation Javier story. They find Manuela again, who escaped to come help them get to Javier's mansion, explaining that she has a terminal illness that she inherited from her mother, who's dead. And Javier, in desperation, injected her with the Veronica virus. Javier so far has managed to keep her from transforming into a monster. Leon, who's here on top secret orders from the president himself, lets Krauser in on the real mission, not just stopping Javier, but to investigate all knowledge on the virus that could be useful to the government. And Krauser agrees to help him until the end. They storm Javier's mansion straight to his lab to find that the missing teenage girls in the village were kidnapped to transplant their organs into Manuel. This has been going on for almost 15 years. He needs to change them out regularly to keep her from dying. And he unleashes the same monster that they fought when they first found Manuela. It cripples Krauser's arm before it dies and turns out to be Manuela's mother mutated. Her father has had enough and transforms for the final battle, where Manuela helps by using the same flame powers that Alexia was using. This is one of my only major gripes with this game. You get a different ending where she lives or dies depending on how much blood she gives during the fight. Since in typical Resident Evil fashion, you will never see or hear from her again in this series, I really couldn't give a shit. if not for the fact to unlock Krauser's special missions, she has to live. This is stupid. I tried this mission many times, but I'm not gonna grind for weapons and ammo to try to complete this boss fight with Manuela living, and then every time I fail it, the resources just get drained. Eventually, I just gave up. It's a waste of my fucking time. I've seen his special missions on YouTube anyway. They're just a rehash of the 2 final levels where you play as Krauser with his secret thoughts on the mission that show he's turning into a villain and becoming distrusting of Leon and the president. Not really worth it. With that, they escape on an evac chopper after a mission well done, and that's the end of the game. This game is phenomenal, miles better than the first game. This might honestly be my favorite retelling of Resident Evil 2, and that's saying something, because the Resident Evil 2 remake is fucking insanely good. This game does the impossible, and that is removing a lot of Wesker's involvement in Code Veronica, which originally was the only fucking reason to play it, and somehow making a better fucking version of that game by a landslide in the process. I definitely see myself revisiting this game. There's also cool unlockable costumes like Leon's Resident Evil 4 outfit and a model viewer that's become a series staple. These games both were a lot of fun to play through. Are they a replacement for a full-fledged Resident Evil game? No. Are they a replacement for getting caught up on Resident Evil's original timeline? In the case of the first game, kinda, if you just want a brief, basic overview to catch up to speed and still play something. In the case of the second game, absolutely. Better versions narratively than the originals. And since Capcom acts like everything in every scenario fucking happened anyway, you might as well get the best story experience you can get. If you've never played these, give them a try, especially the second game. You'll have a lot of fun. If you've never played a classic Resident Evil game before and absolutely nothing is going to sway you to get into them, trust me, I've been there. It took a very, very long time for me to warm up and enjoy classic games. Or if you tried them and didn't like them and so never played the rest of them, I would say also give this a try. You might enjoy them a lot more this way. I debated skipping these even knowing parts of them are still canon today just because I couldn't wait to get to 4, 5, and 6 and just enjoy myself. But I'm glad I stopped by to take a look at these. This was well worth my time. Next stop, the era that redefined gaming and is probably the most popular and successful in the franchise, the reign of 4 through 6. I've heard fans refer to this as the BOW era, as in bioorganic warfare, and that definitely fits. Even the CGI movies to this day portray these characters as on this level in terms of action, skill, and capability, and for that reason, it may be a while before that video comes out. I'm gonna go through every game and CGI movie set in between to really experience the era in full. Not really gonna do a movie review or something because I don't want any bullshit when it comes to copyright, but I will be rewatching them all personally. Spoiler alert, it's the era that defined my childhood and teenage year, and every game in it I love to death, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you next time.